On September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur died at 25 years old, 6 days after being shot on the Las Vegas Strip. He wasn't just a rapper. His catalog anchored West Coast hip-hop. His acting career had already produced multiple film credits, and his political voice made him as much a target as a star.
On the night of September 7th, he was riding in the passenger seat of a black BMW 750 driven by Death Row Records founder Suge Knight. Hours earlier, Shakur had been involved in a physical altercation with Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand after a Mike Tyson fight, a confrontation investigators would later treat as the spark for what followed. Stopped at a red light near the Strip, a white Cadillac pulled alongside.
A shooter fired 14 rounds from point-blank range with a .40 caliber handgun. 4 bullets struck Shakur, chest, arm, and thigh, while Knight was grazed in the head but survived. Shakur underwent multiple emergency surgeries at University Medical Center before going into cardiac and respiratory failure.
For 27 years, no one was charged, despite the shooting happening on a lit street packed with witnesses, a gap investigators blamed on Death Row's own code of silence and a reluctance among witnesses to cooperate with police. Then, in 2023, Las Vegas police arrested Dwayne "Keffy D. Davis after he detailed his own alleged role in interviews and a self-published memoir, admitting he supplied the gun even as he denied being the shooter.
His trial for orchestrating the killing finally opened in August 2026, nearly 30 years after the bullets were fired, in a case that outlived most of the men connected to it. Prosecutors allege Davis didn't pull the trigger, but organized the retaliation and handed the Glock to his nephew, Orlando Anderson, in the back seat of the Cadillac. Anderson himself was killed in an unrelated shooting 2 years later and was never charged. The forensic record from that night has been picked apart for 3 decades. No shell casings were ever recovered at the scene. The Cadillac was never found, and Knight, the one surviving passenger, has repeatedly declined to cooperate with investigators, feeding decades of competing theories about who actually ordered the hit.
6 months later, on March 9, 1997, Christopher Wallace, the notorious B.I.G., was pronounced dead at 24. He had built himself into the defining voice of East Coast rap, turning street narrative into radio-dominant hits and living the King of New York persona he rapped about. He had flown to Los Angeles for the Soul Train Music Awards despite the ongoing East Coast-West Coast tension that followed Shakur's murder 6 months earlier. After leaving an after-party, his GMC Suburban stopped at a red light at Wilshire and Fairfax. A dark Chevrolet Impala pulled beside the vehicle, and its driver opened fire with a 9mm handgun. 4 rounds struck Wallace. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but was pronounced dead just after 1 in the morning. His case, like Shakur's, went unsolved for years. The investigation later became entangled with allegations against David Mack, a former LAPD officer separately convicted of bank robbery, whom Wallace's family named in a wrongful death lawsuit alleging police involvement in the killing.
The suit was ultimately dismissed after accusations that both sides withheld evidence, and the LAPD closed the case without charges. The detail investigators keep returning to. Wallace had released an album titled Ready to Die the same week he was killed, and by multiple accounts, his own single Hypnotize was still playing from the SUV speakers when the shots hit.
Ballistics matched the weapon to no other known LAPD case, and no suspect vehicle was ever recovered. The department's own internal investigation, later reviewed by a federal judge, found evidence of mishandled files and destroyed records tied to the Rampart corruption scandal that was unfolding in the same precinct at the same time. The same scandal that produced the allegations against Officer Mack. To date, the murder remains formally unsolved, one of the only major unsolved cases from the era with no suspect ever charged, despite a defendant's own posthumous album title reading like a prophecy. On June 18, 2018, José Onfroy, XXXTentacion, was shot dead at 20 years old in Deerfield Beach, Florida. In barely 3 years of releasing music, he had become one of the most streamed artists on the planet, a defining and deeply controversial voice of the SoundCloud rap era, his career shadowed throughout by a pending domestic violence case. He had just left a motorcycle dealership in his BMW i8 when an SUV blocked his car.
2 armed men approached. Investigators concluded the target wasn't Onfroy himself, but a Louis Vuitton bag visible through the window, holding roughly $50,000 in cash he'd withdrawn minutes earlier. During the robbery, he was shot once in the neck at close range. Unlike the Shakur and Wallace cases, this wasn't a decades-long mystery.
The entire sequence was captured on high-definition dealership surveillance footage, and 4 suspects were identified and arrested within weeks. Prosecutors later argued the robbery had been planned in advance, with the crew tracking his movements and cash withdrawals. 3 of the 4 were convicted of first-degree murder in 2023.
A global streaming phenomenon, one of the best-selling artists of his generation, killed for a bag of cash on camera in under a minute. Investigators reconstructed the entire crime in under 72 hours using license plate readers, cell tower pings, and the dealership's own camera network. A stark contrast to cases from the analog era where the same kind of daylight public shooting produced decades of dead ends.
The 4th suspect, believed to be the getaway driver, took a plea deal and testified against the others, providing prosecutors the confirmation that the robbery had been staged after tracking Onfoy's bank withdrawal that same afternoon. On December 8, 2019, Jared Higgins, Juice WRLD, died at 21, just 6 days after his birthday. His melodic, largely freestyled catalog had already crossed into billions of streams, making him one of the defining voices of the post-SoundCloud melodic rap wave. His private jet landed at Chicago's Midway Airport after a flight from Los Angeles, where federal agents were waiting to search the aircraft, reportedly after a tip about firearms on board. According to investigators, in an attempt to dispose of evidence before the search, he swallowed a handful of Percocet pills on the spot, in view of people around him. He went into a seizure minutes later. Paramedics administered Narcan multiple times, but it wasn't enough to reverse the overdose. The Cook County Medical Examiner ruled the cause of death oxycodone and codeine toxicity, with the manner of death accidental.
Members of his tour team were later charged separately in connection with weapons found on the plane. The line that circulated after his death was his own. From the song Legends, he had rapped that the greats never make it past 21. He didn't, by 6 days.
What investigators found notable wasn't just the quantity of pills, but the timing. Agents said the search had been prompted by a tip involving firearms, not narcotics, meaning the fatal decision to swallow the pills may have been an attempt to avoid a charge that, under federal law, likely wouldn't have applied to him personally.
His mother later established a foundation focused on youth mental health and substance abuse prevention, citing the randomness of a panic-driven decision made in the final minutes before a routine custom stop. On February 19, 2020, Bashar Jackson, Pop Smoke, was shot to death at 20 years old inside a rented Hollywood Hills mansion.
He was the breakout face of Brooklyn drill, a genre he had helped push from a local scene into national chart placement in under 2 years. Days earlier, he had posted an Instagram photo of a gift bag that, in the background, inadvertently revealed the house number and street sign of the rental property.
Investigators concluded that detail is exactly how the robbers located him. At roughly 4:30 in the morning, several masked intruders broke into the house looking for jewelry and cash. In the struggle that followed, Jackson was shot multiple times in the back. Several people were eventually charged, notably including minors who were tried as adults given the severity of the crime.
His posthumous album, released months later, debuted at number 1, a commercial peak he never lived to see. A single geotag detail, small enough to miss, is what investigators say ended the career of an artist who was, at that exact moment, on the verge of a national breakout.
Detectives noted the crew had also tracked his location through other social posts in the days before, cross-referencing tag locations with public flight records to confirm he'd be in Los Angeles that week rather than New York.
The case became a frequently cited cautionary example in later discussions of celebrity geotagging risk, a single background detail in a single photo, technical enough to be missed by a fan, precise enough for a crew already looking for him. On September 7, 2018, Malcolm McCormick, Mac Miller, was found unresponsive in his Studio City home at 26.
He had spent nearly a decade rebuilding his image from a frat rap novelty act into one of the most respected producer-rappers of his generation, earning collaborators' trust across genres. His death came weeks after a highly public breakup and a car accident that had drawn tabloid scrutiny to his substance use. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled his death an accidental overdose involving fentanyl, cocaine, and alcohol. The technical detail that made the case a template for a much larger crisis. McCormick believed he was taking legitimate oxycodone pills. They were counterfeit, pressed to visually match pharmaceutical tablets and laced with fentanyl, a synthetic opioid roughly 50 times more potent than heroin, undetectable by taste, smell, or appearance. Investigators traced the pills through a small supply chain. The dealer who sold McCormick the counterfeit tablets was later sentenced to over a decade in federal prison, with 2 others convicted for their role in the distribution chain. His death became one of the earliest widely covered cases of counterfeit pill fentanyl poisoning in the music industry, a pattern that would recur across the genre within 2 years.
Text messages entered into evidence showed the transaction had been arranged through an intermediary just 2 days before his death, part of a supply chain investigators say ran from a Los Angeles-based dealer up through a source with access to a pill press capable of stamping counterfeit tablets with the exact imprint of a real pharmaceutical brand.
The case is frequently cited in DEA counterfeit pill briefings as an example of how visually indistinguishable fake oxycodone had become from the real thing by 2018, the same year the DEA's own seizure data showed counterfeit pill submissions beginning their sharpest rise on record. On March 31, 2019, Ermias Ashkadam, Nipsey Hussle, was shot to death at 33 in the parking lot of his own store.
A Grammy-nominated artist, he had become just as well known for buying back real estate in the South Los Angeles neighborhood he grew up in, turning the Marathon clothing into both a retail brand and a literal physical investment in the block. He was standing outside that store when Eric Holder, someone he knew from the neighborhood, approached him.
Investigators say Holder confronted Ashkadam over street rumors that he had been labeled an informant, rumors Ashkadam's associates would later call baseless. Holder walked away, then returned minutes later with a handgun and opened fire at close range, hitting Ashkadam at least 10 times. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Holder was convicted of first-degree murder in 2022 and sentenced to 60 years to life.
The detail that gives the case its edge, the parking lot where he died was the same ground he had spent years trying to make safer for the people who lived around it, killed by a rumor in the place he built to disprove one.
Investigators noted Holder fled in a getaway car driven by a woman later charged as an accessory, and that Ashkadam, in his final minutes, reportedly told bystanders who approached to stay back rather than move him, a detail paramedics said complicated the response. The city closed the block outside the store for a public memorial that drew crowds estimated near his own record sales figures, and the intersection was later co-named in his honor, permanently tying the location to both his life's work and his death.